Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Today I'm going to cover the early Greek philosopher Democritus of Abdera. Democritus lived in the north of Greece, that's where Abdera is, and he is one of my personal favorites that I've come across so far. Jonathan Barnes calls him the most prolific and influential pre-Socratic philosopher. So I've been reading about these pre-Socratic philosophers. I've been learning about them. I had started reading Plato, realized I needed to go back and learn what Plato was referring to and the philosophers he was referring to. So most of these philosophers are called pre-Socratic because they're pre-Socrates. But Democritus is cutting it very, very close to being pre-Socratic. Democritus lived between 460 and 370 BC. Socrates lived between 470 and 399 BC. Now, these dates are always a little, we don't know for sure, but in one account says that Democritus was just 1 year older than Socrates. So cutting it very close on the line of being pre-Socratic. There's a couple elements in that. One is just time-wise that you would be before Socrates, but also on the idea side, that your ideas would have been known by Socrates and he would have been responding to your ideas. There's also an account that Democritus traveled to Athens and that he knew Socrates, but that Socrates did not know him. Let me read from the Lives of the Eminent Philosophers, which was put together about 500 years after Democritus, but this is one of the books that I've been going through with each of these philosophers because he just kind of compiles all the information they had about the philosophers at that time. So I'm going to start right at the beginning of the account of Democritus, and here we go. Democritus was the son of Hegestratus, though some say of Athenocritus, and others again of Damasippus. He was a native of Abdera, or according to some of Miletus. He was a pupil of certain Magians and Chaldeans. For when King Xerxes, So when King Xerxes was entertained by the father of Democritus, he left men in charge, as in fact is stated by Herodotus. And from these men, while still a boy, he learned theology and astronomy. And I'll stop reading the account there. This is so great because with Diogenes Laertius, who wrote the Lives of the Eminent Philosophers, this is what he does. Like he just compiles all the information, whether it contradicts or not. So Democritus obviously didn't have three fathers, but so that we don't know who his actual father was, and we see there's different accounts of where he was from as well. But after that is what I find to be really interesting, that he was a pupil of certain Magians and Chaldeans. Now, the Magians were the Magi, and they were from Persia, so he was learning from them. There are accounts that he went to Egypt, to the Red Sea, to Persia, to many different areas to learn. And I think it's really neat. Egypt as well, India, Ethiopia. So he just learned from different people in each of these places. The other neat thing about that is that while he was still a boy, he was learning theology and astronomy. And what we see in the life of Democritus is that he is very well-rounded. I mean, he would be the Renaissance man before the Renaissance. He was interested in so many different areas and yeah, just a neat to read about him in some of the statements that he made. So he during his life, he trained himself in physics, ethics, mathematics, and education. He was known as the laughing philosopher. And here's a quote. Democritus used to laugh at everything since he regarded all human affairs as ridiculous. And let me close out just kind of information about his life by talking about the end of his life. And this is him climbing the hill of the Acropolis. So here we go. When he was an old man, Democritus climbed the Acropolis and gasped for breath. He said that he was like the whole Athenian state, much hot air, little real puff. End quote. So he's making funnies till the end there. This is what I find to be one of the most impressive things about him, is just the list of books or works that he is known to have written. And in the Loeb version. I mean, this is like 3 or 4 pages of works that he is said to have written. I want to read some of the titles of these works because we've lost all of them. We have fragments of a few, but we've lost all of these. But I wish we had these because they sound incredible. So there's one, Of Those in Hades. That's the title of the book, Of Those in Hades. Of Manly Excellence or of Virtue. Of the Different Shapes of Atoms. There's 2 with the title of The Soul. There is On Beauty of Verses, On Euphonious and Cacophonous Letters, Concerning Homer, or On Correct Epic Diction, Of the Sacred Writings of Babylon, A Voyage Round the Ocean, a Chaldean Treatise, and Problems Wrought by Hand. There was another book that was, the one about Hades. Here was something that Proclus said about that. He said, many of the old thinkers, among them the natural scientist Democritus, in his writings about Hades, have collected stories of those who are thought to have died and then come back to life again. End quote. So that was not just a book genre we have now of near-death experiences or death experiences, I guess you could say, where someone has traveled to the other world and then come back to make statements about it. But that was something that Democritus collected in his works. One really fun thing I think about him is that it is said that he dated his works to the fall of Troy. And so there was one of his works, and this comes from the Loeb edition here. It says this. He says that the Lesser Dies Cosmos was compiled 730 years after the capture of Troy. End quote. It'd be fun to just start doing that in our lives. Like we just start dating things to the fall of Troy. The contemporaries, I mentioned Socrates. Leucippus was another contemporary, and Leucippus is actually known as the founder of atomism, and I'm about to get into that. But whenever you hear of Democritus, you often hear those 2 names together, Leucippus and Democritus together, because they were talking about atomism, and but we don't know a lot about Leucippus, so a lot of what we talk about when we talk about atomism is referring to Democritus. Also Anaxagoras, who I covered in last week's episode, another contemporary of Democritus. Plato ignored him, which is really interesting. And there's another account that said Plato actually wished to burn all of his writings. So Plato ignores him, but Aristotle mentions Democritus often. And so a lot of the fragments, a lot of the sayings that we have from Democritus come from works by Aristotle. So I just find that to be really interesting that one of the famous Greek philosophers totally ignores him, but the other one seems to have been quite interested in what he had to say. Now, with each of these early philosophers, they all had a first principle, what in Greek is known as the arche. And it's the moving principle. It's the first principle. It's the thing that that's the foundation of all else. So with Heraclitus, we saw that it was fire. For Democritus, his first principle, and we kind of have to say it plural here, first principles, but we could say the first principle is that of atoms. And then the secondary one or the dual first principle is void. So there was atoms and void. And let me read in I'm going to give a quote here right from Aristotle. So what I just mentioned of Aristotle mentioning him often, here is a mention of Democritus in Aristotle's Metaphysics. So here we go. And this talks about atoms and void. Leucippus and his companion Democritus say that the elements are the full and the void, by which they mean what is and what is not, with what is full and solid being what is, and what is void and rarefied being what is not. Hence they say that what is no more existence than what is not, because void exists just as much as solidity. These, according to them, are the material causes of things. And so I'll stop reading there. So we've got atoms, we've got the full and the void. And they say the full is made of atoms and the void is devoid of atoms. There's no atoms there, but atoms are constantly moving and they're trying to get in to that void. The atoms are what make up everything else. Atom is a Greek word, atom, and it comes from it comes from the Greek, our English word comes from the Greek word atomus. And the word tomos means to cut or to slice. And then if you put an A in front of it, like we do with moral and amoral, it just means the opposite, or not, or un. So if tomos is to cut or to slice, then atomus would be something that's uncuttable or indivisible. And we're familiar with this word in English. We usually have it at the end of the word. So anatomy is like the cutting up of a body to see its parts. Appendectomy is the removal of the appendix, the cutting of the appendix. Tonsillectomy, the removal of the tonsils. And even dichotomy is a division or contrast between two ideas. So we know that word tomos, and that's where we get the word atom. And where this is important is this puts a stop to infinity. There is in the idea of Democritus, there's an endpoint. You can't just keep dividing things forever. It eventually reaches the level of the atom, and you cannot atomos it. You cannot cut it anymore. It's uncuttable. It's indivisible. It's the final thing. These atoms they're ungenerated and indestructible. So that they've always been there, and you cannot destroy them. If atoms get together and make something, you can destroy that, but the atom itself is indestructible. It's not visible to our eyes, but the things that atoms make up, or the bodies that are made up by these atoms, those are what are visible to our eyes and visible to our senses. Democritus regarded the soul and the mind as atomic, and then the soul is what imparts movement to living creatures. I find this interesting. He also regarded the gods as atomic compounds. And if we're looking at creation is a combination of these atoms. He had a similar idea to Anaxagoras last week of things starting to move in a circle, in a vortex, and things being separated out in this act of creation. Destruction is their dissolution. So creation is the combination of the atoms. The destruction is their dissolution. On the void side of things, void is a nothingness or a vacuum, and atoms move into that void. And what's interesting about a lot of this is that having void is a response to a lot of the earlier philosophers who said there is no void. You can't even talk about things that don't exist, or you can't even talk about the void. And here, Democritus is making it very clear there are atoms, and there is the void. The other thing the principle of atoms does in this atomic theory is that it solves a paradox that was introduced by Zeno. Zeno has this famous paradox thing where if you're trying to get to the middle of a field, you'll never get there because it just keeps dividing. So if you're on a football field and you make it to the 50-yard line, then you get to the 25th yard line, and then you just keep going, but you can always divide that. And so the idea there is if there's infinity divisions, like there's no endpoint, you just keep dividing. And so what the atom theory does is stop that. It puts an endpoint to it where the atom is the final thing. You eventually divide to something that is uncuttable, the atom, or indivisible. And another thing Democritus said about these atoms is that they generate fire, water, air, and earth. So what we saw with Empedocles was that he thought that 4 elements made up the world, and those were earth, water, air, and fire. And what we saw with so many of the other of these philosophers is that they kind of latched onto one of those things, whether it was water or fire or air. Here, Democritus is saying, no, those aren't the thing. Those aren't the main elements. Those things are actually generated from atoms. Atoms are the main element. We know a lot about Democritus, well, through Aristotle, but also through Epicurus. And so Epicurus it kind of took these ideas and made them more famous and I'll be reading Epicurus later on and look forward to that. But Jonathan Barnes says that there was a lasting effect on Western science and philosophy by these ideas by Democritus, but they really were kind of broadcast, I guess you could say, through Epicurus. To learn about Democritus, I read 3 different books. I read the Penguin Classics edition, and that is translated and introduced by Jonathan Barnes. I read the Oxford World's Classic edition, translated and introduced by Robin Waterfield, and then I read that Loeb edition of the Diogenes Laertius book. In the Jonathan Barnes one, he broke down the work of Democritus into 4 different areas, and those are atomic theory, scientific and literary studies, knowledge and skepticism, and then ethical fragments. And so that just kind of gives an idea of the type of things that Democritus was interested in and was writing about. Now what I want to do is just highlight some of his sayings and the favorite things that I came across of what he had said. And then I will cover the one thing that I am still thinking about Democritus. So first off, on his sayings, this was my favorite part about him. And you really only get this in the Penguin Classics edition by Jonathan Barnes in the section about Democritus. But there's a whole section at the end. It almost reads like wisdom literature or Proverbs, where it's just a bunch of sayings that Democritus made, but they're great. And I made a list and like underlined and just was really interested in a lot of them. I'm only going to share a few here, but I really encourage you to get that one book, the Early Greek Philosophy of Jonathan Barnes, because he covers so many of these sayings by Democritus, and they are so good. So here are a couple that were my favorite. Courage makes disasters small. Courage makes disasters small. Here he is talking about Homer. Homer, having a nature divinely inspired, fashioned a world of words of every sort. I love that. Let me read one here. And this is about money. Desire for money, if it is not limited by satiety, is far heavier than extreme poverty. For greater desires create greater needs. End quote. Another one, voluntary labors make it easier to endure involuntary labors. We saw that in Gulag Archipelago, where Solzhenitsyn said the people who actually were able to cope better once they made it into this prison or were put into this prison, they were the ones that had made decisions prior to the Gulag that made them the type of people who could endure the Gulag. So voluntary labors make it easier to endure involuntary labors. There's this directional aspect of your life. Another one, a man completely enslaved to money will never be just. And let me read this one about bastard knowledge. This is pretty good. But in criteria, he says that there are 2 kinds of knowledge, one which comes through the senses and the other which comes through thinking. And he calls the one that comes through thinking genuine and ascribes to it its trustworthiness in the assessment of truth, while the other one comes through the senses he calls bastard and denies that it is reliable in the discernment of truth. End quote. So there you have one of Democritus's ideas, just that between thinking and the senses, there's a difference in what we get out of both of those. Now I want to cover a few sayings that I refer to as not messing around. Democritus is not messing around when he's saying these statements. And I posted some of these on Twitter X, and it was just kind of fun to see the responses. So the first one is this: one should kill at any cost all which offend against justice. Again, one should kill at any cost all which offend against justice. The next one, all men conscious of their evil actions in life suffer for their whole lifetime in trouble and fear, telling false stories about what comes after death. And the third one here, drive out by reasoning the unmastered pain of a numbed soul. Drive out by reasoning the unmastered pain of a numbed soul. All right, I want to cover a few final sayings here that connect to different Bible verses. So I'm going to give the saying of Democritus. I will then give the Bible verse and where it comes from in the Bible. So the first one, frequent association with the wicked increases a disposition to vice. And in the Bible, we get bad company corrupts good behavior from 1 Corinthians 15:33. Next one should avoid even speaking of evil deeds. And in Ephesians 5:12, it is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. Next one, some men rule cities and are slaves to women. And that one just made me think of King Solomon. Next, it is better to examine your own mistakes than those of others. And in the Bible, we've got remove the plank from your own eye. And the last one, it is better to be praised by another than by yourself. And in Proverbs 27:2, we have let another praise you and not your own mouth. All right, so if I'm going to distill everything down to one thing here about Democritus that I'm still thinking about, it would be this. With each of these early Greek philosophers, we have this first principle. And many were elements that you could see. Like I mentioned earlier, Heraclitus had fire, water. There are elements that you could see. Some of them had air, so you couldn't necessarily see air, but a lot of the elements were things that were visible, or at least something to the senses. Now we're getting into things that are invisible. And there's this element of going from mythos to logos. So you had Homer and epic mythology, epic poetry, and you're moving to the realm of logos, where it's arguments and ideas about the natural world. So things that you can observe and things you can see. And when you think back to the Homeric epics, the gods, you see the results of what you do, or you explain things by the gods. So if it's lightning, or if things are moving one way, it would be attributed to the gods, but you wouldn't necessarily see the gods. There were a few situations where in Iliad where the gods would come down in the form of different people, but sometimes they would know it was God, other times they wouldn't. But the idea is that the gods are kind of invisible, but you're seeing them work amongst people. But with the early Greek philosophers, you're trying to get away from the mythos. You're trying to actually look at things and see how they are and explain them without mentioning Zeus or without mentioning the gods. But here with Democritus, you're actually kind of moving back into that invisible realm of, you can't sense atoms. But Democritus is asking you to believe in something that is invisible to the senses, but is the foundation for how everything is built, and it's the foundation for everything that we do see and we do sense. And I just found that to be really, really interesting, because with these abstract ideas, and it came to the point where Democritus thought that atoms were the main thing, and to the point where our senses couldn't be trusted. And so I'd read that one quote earlier, but he also makes this statement here: by convention, color; by convention, sweet; by convention, bitter; in reality, atoms and the empty. And so what that's referring to is, by convention, like by senses, we see color, we know what's sweet; by convention, what's bitter. But in reality, that's not reality. Reality is in the atoms and in the void. And it's just it's an interesting thing, because you can't see it. You can't say, oh, that idea makes sense. I see that every day in my life. I mean, just like now we have microscopes, and we've got the atomic theory now, but just imagine, like, he came up with all of this just through reason, not through experimentation, not looking at things under microscopes, not any of that. This was all through reason. And when he's sharing these ideas, people have to accept it, because they're not experiencing it with their senses. So that's my one thing for this week. I just think it's interesting, just to kind of see this flow of how things go from mythos to logos, where you're really trying to not have everything relate to the gods anymore, but more of a natural explanation. And then now you're kind of getting back into, well, you've got to believe that there are atoms that are make up each of the things that you sense. I'm just wondering, like, what people thought of it at that time, and if it was a big jump for them intellectually to move in that area. So in conclusion, Democritus has been one of my favorite philosophers so far. Most of that has to do with his sayings and his kind of wisdom literature. His ethical statements are just incredible, and I do highly recommend that you purchase that Penguin book just to get those and to read them. The Atomic Theory, you could say he's a bit ahead of his time. Just incredible that he came up with that through reason and not experimentation. And it's just, I love it. It's such a neat thing that he came up with that at that time in history. So as for what's next, I'm still going to be reading about the early Greek philosophers here. I've gone through all the Presocratics, and now I'm entering into the Sophists. So I will kind of keep continuing to talk about these different philosophers that I'm coming across. And once I finish with the Sophists, I'll then get back into reading Plato. So I'm really excited about that. And this kind of look back at the early Greek philosophers has been so fruitful and very helpful to me, just in understanding what Plato was talking about. I'm going to go back to Plato now with a much better toolkit than what I started with Plato. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I would love to hear from you, especially about these early Greek philosophers. I'm always trying to learn more. So if you have anything you want to share about Democritus, please email me at eric@booksoftitans.com. Even better, you can comment right on this episode in Substack. That way other people can see it and they can comment on it. We can get a good discussion going. I'll be back next week to discuss another philosopher. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.